It's a story that's becoming as common as the Ukraine war is long. Russia attempts an assault and Ukraine crushes it. This time, Russia wanted to launch an attack on Lyman, which is one of Ukraine's fortress cities in the Donetsk Oblast. We say wanted to because Russia didn't even make it close enough to launch the assault in the first place. Ukraine stopped Vladimir Putin's forces in their tracks. Ukraine brilliantly outsmarted Putin with a multifaceted counter-assault that crushed Russia's Lyman assault before it even started. On October 4th, Euromaidan Press reported on a brilliant series of Ukrainian strikes near the Lyman front that combined air, artillery, and drone assaults to great effect. Russia's plan, as it has been for months, was to try to cross a vital river that could provide its troops with a direct route into Lyman. The entire Russian assault hinged on this crossing, and Ukraine cut them off at the pass. No matter how hard Russia tried, Ukraine's systematic approach of cutting river crossings and then destroying Russia's reserves before they could amass for other assaults or attempt future crossings has stopped Russia in its tracks. Lyman still stands, and if Russia's strategy doesn't evolve, it'll stand for a very long time. That's not what Putin wants, because Lyman has been on his radar since the beginning of his invasion. The city was one of many that Putin's forces managed to overrun during the chaos at the beginning of the invasion. Ukraine, caught off guard, wasn't able to prevent Russia's brief occupation of Lyman. The country's forces withdrew, gathering their strength for a concerted counteroffensive that started to push the Russian lines back. It took Ukraine a while to reach Lyman again, but when it did, Russia could do nothing to stop Ukraine from reclaiming the vital Donetsk city. By October 1, 2022, media outlets including The Guardian were reporting on Russian troops being forced to pull out of Lyman. Ukraine's counteroffensives had brought it to within touching distance of the city's borders. Putin's forces had to make the difficult choice of remaining as they were encircled, which would have meant certain death, or withdrawing to find another place from which to assault, which was sure to anger Putin. The Russian troops chose the latter option, with Russia's Ministry of Defense later trying to dress the withdrawal up as a move to more advantageous frontiers, The Guardian reports. That wasn't what it was. Russia's entire contingent of around 5,000 soldiers had been pushed out by Ukraine, and they haven't been able to retake the city in the 3 years since. Back in 2022, the spokesperson for Ukraine's eastern forces, Serhiy Charavarty, outlined why Lyman's retaking was such a huge victory for Ukraine. Lyman is important because it's the next step towards the liberation of the Ukrainian Donbass. It's an opportunity to go further to Crimea and to Severodonetsk, and it's psychologically very important, Zherebets said. Apply the inverse to that statement and you see why Putin wants Lyman so much. In February 2024, the BBC reported on the situation in Lyman, noting that the city was half-ruined and strategically important for its mass of railway connections. Granted, those railway connections have been half destroyed by Russia, leaving broken rails and cables behind. However, Ukraine knew in 2024, as it knows now, that Russia would try to repair those rails to aid its logistics in the Donetsk region. Everything that Putin's war machine does inside Ukraine relies on rails, the Iron Leviathan. As the International Center for Defense and Security dubbed Russia's rail network in December 2024, carries everything: troops, equipment, supplies, even citizens. It all comes via rail, and Lyman is as important a rail hub as any in the Donbass. Taking Lyman means Russia getting its hands on a major railway junction, and that would take Putin one step closer to seizing Donetsk. In October 2025, Russia is still trying to take Lyman. The latest attempt at an attack, Euromaidan Press reports, saw Russian commanders start to organize a classic assault that would combine tanks, artillery, and infantry. Together, these three parts of the assault would rush Lyman, reaching the outskirts of the city before bedding in. With a foothold established, that initial wave of troops and equipment could then hold the line as the reinforcements arrived. Infiltration groups would funnel through this foothold and enter Lyman itself, operating under the radar of defenders to weaken Ukraine's hold on this key Donetsk city. Massive armored formations were moved into staging areas to prepare for this massive combined assault. However, Russia had a problem, and it's the same problem Russia has had ever since Ukraine managed to push it out of Lyman in October 2022, the Zherebets River. An assault on Lyman isn't possible until a reliable route is created over that river. Pontoon bridges are Russia's solution. These temporary floating structures are supposed to hold long enough for Russian forces to get across, and Russia has been forcing its engineers to work day and night to build them. If Russia were able to keep all of this activity under the radar, it might have had a chance of succeeding, but that's not what happened. Russia is trying to operate in a territory where Ukraine's drones fill the skies. Ukraine has eyes on everything, and it spotted Russia's attempts to amass a large force for a full-scale assault on Lyman long before Russia was prepared to attempt that assault. The pontoon bridges weren't complete. Russia didn't have all of its forces in place to execute its plan. Ukraine knew what Russia had planned from the start, and over the last few days, it has launched a series of strikes that have destroyed Russia's assaulting forces before they ever even had a chance to do what they were supposed to do. This wasn't a counterattack. It was a carefully planned and extremely precise demolition of Putin's ambitions that was made possible when Ukraine's 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade arrived to completely change the complexion of the battle for Lyman. That brigade, combined with Ukraine's aerial assets and drone operators, launched a combined assault of its own that easily overcame the combined offensive that Russia had planned. The pontoon bridges were Ukraine's first target. Bridging is an often underappreciated, though extremely vital, aspect of the Ukraine war. Writing for Forbes in December 2024, Vikram Mittal made that point. At the time, Mittal claimed that bridging would shape the battle lines for the winter to come. His point was pertinent, and it applies to Lyman and the Zherebets River just as much in the fall of 2025 as it did back then. Speaking about the rivers that crisscross Ukraine, Mittal wrote, "These rivers act as natural barriers to heavy military vehicles, and many bridges have already been targeted and destroyed. Consequently, the outcome of this phase of the war will partly depend on each side's ability to conduct effective military bridging operations." That answers the question of why Russia has been building pontoon bridges over the Zherebets River. Every existing crossing has long since been destroyed. If it hadn't been, it would be an obvious kill zone for Ukraine's drones to roam, as well as a point on which artillery fire could be focused. Existing bridges are out of the question, so Russia has to build floating pontoons in a desperate effort to get its forces closer to Lyman. Ukraine destroyed those pontoons without mercy when it struck against Russia's budding offensive. Writing for Euromaidan Press, David Axe said that Ukraine found itself engaged in a deadly game of whack-a-bridge. Russia's engineers kept on trying to build the pontoons. Ukraine spotted and then destroyed them. Axe noted that a group of 5 Russian regiments was attempting to surround Lyman, though all would need to cross the Zherebets River before they'd stand a chance. Ukraine's geography is clearly playing a massive role, and the Ukrainian military took advantage with a series of airstrikes against the Russian pontoons throughout the first few days of October. Getting across the Zherebets River would give Russian forces a clear shot at Lyman, Axe wrote. To guard itself against that shot, Euromaidan Press reports, Ukraine has already destroyed at least 5 of the pontoon bridges Russia was building. It cites geolocated footage captured close to Balka Zaravka, which is on the other side of the river and currently occupied by Russia. Pontoon bridges were being erected, and Ukraine took them down using airstrikes. It launched a pair of bombs at each bridge to double the damage and ensure the strikes were still successful, even if one of the bombs happened to miss its target. The operation has set Russia's preparations for an assault on Lyman back by several days, if not a number of weeks, as Ukraine destroyed vital bridging equipment. With that equipment gone, the Russian forces amassing on the other side of the river have to wait until more supplies arrive. No one knows when those supplies will reach Putin's troops, but when they do, you can almost guarantee that Ukraine will have the same response for them. Ukraine's weapon of choice when taking out the 5 Russian pontoons was the GBU-39. These precision bombs can be fired from Ukraine's F-16s, and thanks to a few clever modifications, are also compatible with its MiG-29 fighter jets. That leaves Ukraine with plenty of options when it wants to launch strikes using GBU-39s. This is also one of the Western weapons that Ukraine has in solid supply. Back in October, Militarny reported that the US had placed a $6.9 billion order to cover the production and delivery of an unspecified number of GBU-39s, with Ukraine being one of the main recipients of the weapon. Of course, this doesn't mean that Ukraine now has an absolute abundance of GBU-39s. The American order covers production of this bomb up to December 31, 2035. As for how many GBU-39s Ukraine is going to receive, we don't know the answer to that question. We do know that the bomb has a unit cost of around $40,000, thanks to the United States Air Force's official website. This tells us that a $6.9 billion investment into manufacturing these bombs should produce somewhere in the region of 172,500. Ukraine will hope that a large number of these GBU-39s will reach its shores. After all, the bomb is perfect for taking out everything from pontoon bridges to Russian command posts and equipment. A guided munition, also referred to as a small-diameter bomb, the GBU-39 has an extended range and can be fired day or night in all weather conditions. Using GPS to navigate to its target, a single GBU-39 carriage is capable of carrying up to 4 250-pound guided air-to-surface munitions that can be launched from fighter jets and bombers. This isn't a huge bomb. The US Air Force even lauds that fact, stating that the weapon's compact nature allows fighter jets to carry more GBU-39s than they would be able to carry heavier or larger bombs. However, the GBU-39 makes up for its relative lack of power with extreme precision, making it a great choice for taking out fixed or stationary targets. Russia's pontoon bridges are the perfect example. Though temporary, these bridges don't move around once they're in place. They'll be there for as long as Russia needs them or until Ukraine destroys them. Thanks to the GBU-39's range of 40 nautical miles, which is equivalent to about 74 kilometers, Ukraine can fairly safely send its fighter jets into range of Russia's pontoons, allowing them to unleash their payloads with minimal risk of anti-air fire. A pontoon bridge isn't exactly the most hardened structure in the world. A double dose of GBU-39s for each of Russia's bridges was more than enough to take them out of the Lyman equation. Ukraine could have stopped there, and it would have been enough, at least for a few days. All of the hard work that Russia's engineers put into building the pontoons was undone, and it would be a while before they could be rebuilt. However, Ukraine knows that a massive Russian force awaits on the other side of the Zherebets River, so Ukraine did the smart thing. It went on the attack. Ukraine started hitting Russian tanks at around the same time that it was taking out the pontoon bridges. Specifically, Ukraine deployed first-person view or FPV drones to strike any Russian tanks that were seen moving toward the Lyman front line, Euromaidan press reports. We don't know how many of Russia's tanks Ukraine managed to take out with these drone strikes. Presumably, any that were in range and sight of Ukraine's FPV drones got taken out. According to Euromaidan press, Ukraine did manage to score a direct hit on a T-90M just outside the village of Terny. Putin loves this tank. The most modern in Russia's arsenal, the T-90M has been lauded by Putin himself as the very best in the world, the National Interest reported in April 2024. It isn't. Russia had lost almost 100 of these tanks by that point, the outlet said, and the tank has the same vulnerabilities to drone strikes as Russia's older Soviet-era tanks. Still, another T-90M down is a good result for Ukraine's drone operators near Lyman because it means one less piece of armor Russia can use to launch the offensive that it has planned. That's one more tank to add to the more than 11,200 that Ukraine's Ministry of Finance says Russia has lost since Putin launched his invasion. Ukraine's Lyman-based drone operators haven't solely focused on tanks. For its planned combined assault, Russia needs plenty of artillery. Assuming it can get this artillery over the Zherebets River, Russia will use it to shell the remains of Lyman and, Putin hopes, finally push Ukraine back out. Ukraine's drone operators are trying to ensure that can't happen by taking advantage of Russia's forced standstill to destroy as many of its artillery units as possible. On October 5th, UKR Inform reported that drone operators from Ukraine's 53rd Separate Mechanized Brigade managed to destroy several of Russia's artillery guns. The Signum Battalion of the brigade took to Telegram to report its success, stating, "Pilots from the Signum Battalion carried out strikes on enemy artillery guns. 4 units were destroyed. 3 of them had been hidden in dugouts and under camouflage nets, but our drones located and struck them. The 4th artillery gun was active, its barrel in combat-ready position. We don't allow that. A precise drone hit directly into the barrel disabled another weapon." That's another 4 artillery systems to add to the 33,400 plus that Russia has lost. Ukraine's drone operators have been busy and effective in the Lyman direction. That covers 2 aspects of Ukraine's combined strikes against Russia's Lyman forces. Ukraine's airstrikes decimated Russia's pontoon bridges, making crossing the Zherebets River impossible, at least for the time being. And with its drones, Ukraine took on any tank that was in range, eventually claiming a major symbolic scalp by once again taking out Russia's best tank in the world with a tiny drone that would have cost a fraction of the tank's price to build. However, you may remember that we mentioned the arrival of a certain group to Lyman that has changed the entire dynamic of this embattled sector. That group is the 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade, and as the name implies, it's brought something that Ukraine has been missing in Lyman, an artillery counterpunch that deals with Russia's own artillery. Euromaidan press says the 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade is a new brigade Ukraine appears to have created specifically to augment the Ukrainian 3rd Army Corps operating in Lyman. It's also one of the first Ukrainian artillery brigades to sport Ukraine's own Bogdana self-propelled artillery systems, which are now operating alongside the other tube artillery systems Ukraine had before the war. The arrival of the 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade places significantly more sustained firepower directly to the Lyman sector, able to engage river approaches, road nodes, and staging areas repeatedly and accurately, while moving away before being hit by Russian counter-battery strikes, Euromaidan press reports. That's terrible news for Putin. It doesn't take a genius to work out that organizing a mass assault requires the accumulation of, well, mass. Tanks, armored vehicles, troops, and supplies all need to be grouped together. Now that Ukraine has artillery, it's able to launch accurate strikes against any Russian groupings that it locates. Add the portability of the 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade's artillery into the mix, and you get what is sure to be a clear pattern about to emerge in the Lyman direction. Russia will amass troops and equipment near where it intends to cross the Zherebets River. Ukraine will batter these positions with artillery as soon as it locates them, along with using airstrikes and drones to take out pontoons and deal precise damage against Russia's armor. There is no safe route into Lyman for Russia's forces anymore. Euromaidan Press adds that geolocated footage from the Lyman sector shows that Ukraine's artillery coverage now spans every possible approach route Russia could use to breach the city. That's huge for Ukraine, the outlet says. Before the arrival of the 52nd Separate Artillery Brigade, Ukraine had to rely on its aircraft and drones to conduct both reconnaissance and strikes against Russia's Lyman-focused forces. Now artillery has been added into the mix, and it brings with it the ability to constantly shell any location where Russia attempts to create a pontoon bridge or build up a mass of troops. Drones will handle the precise strikes, fighter jets loaded with GBU-39s will take out any Russian structure that gets a little too close to being completed, and artillery helps to shorten Ukraine's detection-to-engagement chain, allowing it to hit faster and harder as soon as reconnaissance drones spot Russia's crews attempting to do anything. Geography plays a huge role in making Lyman a fortress. With this combined approach, Ukraine may have just made this fortress impenetrable. Russia now has very few offensive options for taking on Lyman. Amassing a large concentration of troops and equipment in preparation for a large assault may have worked earlier in the war, but now Ukraine has far too many tools to deal with this kind of approach. Layered strikes are now taking out any Russians who attempt a Zherebets River crossing. Assuming Ukraine's defenses hold, meaning its troops have to remain well supplied, Lyman isn't going to fall anytime soon. As for Russia, it may not be able to sustain the kinds of losses it's experiencing in Lyman for much longer, especially if it has no gains to show for it. Equipment is in increasingly short supply for Putin's forces. It's not just tanks. Russia will run out of everything by 2026. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's defense against the Russian invasion of Donetsk. And thank you as always for watching.